Characteristics are the hereditary traits transmitted from parent organisms to their offspring. They can be related to particular appearance or behavior. For example, we have 4 limbs. That's a characteristic. Preparation of food through photosynthesis is a basic characteristic of plants. Characteristics in far related organisms would be similar because they are inherited from a common ancestor. Such characteristics are called homologous characteristics. For example, mammals, birds, reptiles, and amphibians have 4 limbs with the same basic limb layout because they have inherited the limbs from a common ancestor. These limbs have been modified to perform different functions. However, all similarities between animals are not necessarily because of a common ancestry. Let's consider the example of bats and birds. These 2 animals have wings, but if you take an example of squirrels and lizards, they do not have wings. From this, we can conclude that birds and bats are more closely related to each other when compared to squirrels and lizards. The wings of bats have skin folds stretched between elongated fingers, whereas the wings of birds are feathery, covering the arm entirely. The designs of the 2 wings look similar because they have a common purpose: to fly. Their structure and components, however, are different. Therefore, although their origin is not common, they serve similar functions. This makes it an analogous characteristic rather than a homologous characteristic. Thus, homologous characteristics and analogous characteristics help us trace evolutionary relationships. They are evidence of evolution. Studies on characteristics were not only conducted on the current species, but also done on the species that are now extinct. How can we know that an extinct species ever existed? When an organism dies, it gets decomposed and leaves behind remnants in the soil. These traces of living organisms are known as fossils. Let's illustrate the process of fossilization of an ammonite. On its death, an ammonite sinks to the sea floor. Scavengers feed on the fleshy body, and all that remains is the shell. Gradually, the ammonite's shell is covered with silt and sand. After a few hundred years, the shell gets buried several feet beneath the surface of the earth. Gradually, the shell decays, and what remains is a rock-like copy of the original shell. This is exposed when the rock is eroded by the wind, water, ice, or by the activities of paleontologists. Let's take a look at various fossils. Fossil trilobite, an invertebrate animal. Fossil fish. Fossil tree trunk. the dinosaur skull. This fossil was found only a few years ago in the Narmada Valley. Mary Anning found the specimen of Ichthyosaurus and was the first fossilist. Evolution doesn't happen in a single day. It is a process which takes place in stages. For example, complicated organs such as the eye are not generated by a single DNA change. The eye was formed over generations, starting from the intermediate rudimentary eye in planaria to the well-complexed eye in vertebrates. All of these changes are in response to adaptation to the environment. For example, the eyes of the octopus and the eyes of vertebrates have evolved entirely independently. These similarities of structure, despite different origins, provide a classic example of biological convergence.